Hey there Blue Mages, Liam here, and welcome to the Blue Academy Raid Guide for the final Coil of Bahamut, Turn 4, or T13 for short. This is the final fight in the Bahamut series for Blue, and it's a big step up in difficulty from the previous two. In fact, of all the Morbol fights, this one is definitely my least favorite, but with some practice it's definitely doable. So let's get started. Mechanically speaking, this fight isn't too bad. The biggest difficulty in this fight is keeping the tank alive. For this fight, we'll be taking a standard 1 tank, 2 healer, 5 DPS mimic setup. I have heard of groups adding an additional tank mimic for Cact Guard, or an additional healer mimic to make things easier on the healers, but I'm personally not a fan of that strat. I haven't really practiced it myself, so I won't be talking about that much. My preference is to have one single tank who diamondbacks every single flare breath and tank buster, and with some practice on the timing, it's not too bad. With changes to Devour making the HP bonus effectively permanent on tanks, you can get away with just keeping bad breath up and should survive flare breaths. However, to make our lives easier, I still recommend using diamondback. Alright. Now let's start talking about the fight. Phase 1 lasts from 100% to 76% and cycles through 3 mechanics: Mega Flare, Flatten, and Earthshaker, in that order. I always open by casting Libra, swift casting Whitewind, and then using Diamondback immediately on the far south side of the arena. This gives me a large threat lead and prevents an immediate death from the first flare breath. Shortly afterwards, Bahamut casts Mega Flare. This has the following effects. Random players will be targeted with splash damage, while other players will be marked with a stack marker that looks like swirling diamonds. 3 players will have large circles appear underneath them, which explode after a small delay. Shortly after this, the stack marker will detonate, followed immediately by a flare breath. The way we handle this is by giving players assigned positions fanning out from where we'll tank Bahamut as shown here. Shortly before Mega Flare is cast, players will run to their positions. Players should move out of the orange circles, and players marked with a stack marker should make their way to right behind Bahamut to share the damage. As the tank, I like to diamondback right as the Mega Flare cast finishes to mitigate the flare breath at the end, as well as any Mega Flare damage. This does mean that if I have the stack marker, then we will stack on me instead of right behind Bahamut, and then players will move away from the front to avoid the flare breath. If there is a pepperoni on me, that's actually fine. Players can just wait for it to detonate before running in for the stack. There is plenty of time. It sounds spooky, but I guarantee it will be much more consistent and safe this way. Throughout Mega Flare, there is a lot of outgoing damage, so white wins from the DPS can be helpful. The next mechanic is Flatten. There's not really a whole lot to say here. It is a tank buster, and it will one-shot the tank. After Flatten, he uses 4 flare breaths immediately. The tank just needs to cast Diamondback once they see the Flatten cast bar, and that handles that mechanic. The third mechanic in this phase is Earthshaker, which usually gives players the most trouble. Bahamut will select 2 random non-tank players indicated by the mark over their head. After a short delay, he will send cone AoEs in the direction of those players and drop a sludge puddle underneath them. These puddles hit hard, and even Diamondback will not save you. There are 3 cone AoEs separated by a short delay. Players will need to get to either side of Bahamut, put up Mighty Guard if they have time, and then stutter step to avoid standing in the puddles. A lot of damage will be going out here, so healers will need to focus the Earthshaker targets, and DPS may need to help with White Wind, especially if a healer is targeted. If an Earthshaker target dies, he will choose another random player for the remaining hits, and it will likely be a wipe. Another strategy for this is to use a Veil. If a player avails another player, no sludge puddles will drop, and the damage will instead go to the availed target. This can work well if it's planned in advance, but do note that this strategy will not be guaranteed to work in the final phase of the fight. As the tank, I like the Diamondback during Earthshakers as well, because there will be a flare breath, there's still a ton of outgoing damage, and the healers really need to be able to focus on the Earthshaker targets and not on the tank. At 76%, Bahamut will cast Giga Flare and transition phases. This is a hard-hitting raid buster, so use any mitigation tools you have, such as Mighty Guard, Addle, Gobskin, Magic Hammer, Bad Breath, and Devour. Bahamut's second phase lasts from 76% to 52%, and is actually a bit easier than his first phase. The 3 mechanics that Bahamut cycles through are Flatten, Mega Flare, and Rage of Bahamut. The phase starts by spawning an ad on the north side of the arena. Assign someone to kill it with level 5 death, and have everyone turn and use missile if it's resisted. During the phase, orbs will spawn around the arena and be tethered to a player. They will slowly move towards that player, speeding up if they live too long. When touched, orbs deal a small amount of damage and apply a stacking debuff called Suffocated Will that later increases the damage of Rage of Bahamut. It will spawn 3 waves of orbs with random orbs per wave, but the total number of orbs is always 7. We want to aim for each player to have no more than 1 stack of Suffocated Will from these orbs. Bahamut will spawn 2 waves of orbs and then cast Flatten, Diamondback as before. After Flatten, he spawns another set of orbs and then shortly after will cast Mega Flare. We handle this the same way as before, only this time a tower will spawn under a random player, and that tower must be soaked to avoid additional raid-wide damage and a bleed effect. After Mega Flare, he will cast Rage of Bahamut. This is a raid-wide AoE. Heal up and mitigate as needed. Any players with 2 stacks of Suffocated will need to use Mighty Guard, and 3 or more stacks will require Diamondback in order to survive. After the cast finishes, another ad will spawn and the cycle continues. The second ad that he spawns will spawn in the southwest corner, and the third ad, if you get to that, is somewhere around the southeast. At 52%, he will use Giga Flare again, and then the ad phase starts, which sort of acts like a cool-off or intermission phase for us. Everyone will want to keep up Mighty Guard during this entire phase to reduce damage, but be careful of excessive white winds as we don't want the tank to lose threat on Bahamut going into the final phase. This phase starts off with a dive bomb from Twintania and Bahamut. The intended way to handle this is to stack in the center, bait the 2 dives, and then move such that you're in neither of their paths. At the same time, Mega Flare mechanics will happen, including splash damage, pepperonis, and stack markers. However, if we Diamondback right as the Twintania dive bomb marker appears, or about 2 seconds after the Bahamut marker, we can avoid this entirely. It can be helpful to loosely spread as it is still quite a bit of damage, however, Mighty Guard and Diamondback should make it so it's not a problem. There will be 3 total dive bombs during this phase, with the last one having only Bahamut and Mega Flare mechanics. Between each set of dive bombs, ads will spawn which can be killed with death effects such as level 5 death and missile. The ads don't really do much since we kill them before it's an issue, and as long as people have Mighty Guard up, they won't be hitting too hard, so I'm not really going to be covering the intended mechanics for the ads. For reference, this is the order of the ads phase. Any wave that has gusts, or the little mosquitoes, can be useful for us. If we had to res anyone, we can keep an enemy up, as you're seeing us do here, and allow people to blood drain to get their mana back. After the final dive bomb, Bahamut will return and cast Terra Flare as a transition into the final phase. We need to use Diamondback to survive. You can cast Diamondback when the first dialogue message disappears. After the Terra Flare, the final phase begins, which is actually the easiest phase in my opinion. Bahamut follows a 3-attack cycle as before, with some additions. The attacks are Akmorn, Mega Flare, Earthshaker, with every second cycle ending with a Giga Flare. Bahamut opens up with Akmorn, which is a multi-hit tank buster. I won't really mention how this mechanic is supposed to work, as it's a bit complicated and it involves having 2 tanks being near each other and using cooldowns to soak the damage together. However, just know that your tank can use Diamondback to survive, and as long as no one is nearby, then everyone will survive. When you see Akmorn being cast, get the heck away from the tank casts Diamondback, everyone is fine. Next up is Mega Flare, but this time it has 2 towers and a tethered ability called Tempest Wing. Remember Twister from Twintania? Tempest Wing tethers to 2 players and after a short delay explodes in a manner similar to Twister. The targeted player is unaffected, but any nearby players will go flying away, likely into the death wall. The tether can be grabbed by players, but we won't worry about that. Instead, to totally simplify Mega Flare, we will instead have every single person Diamondback the entire mechanic. That's right, every single person, all 8 blue mages will Diamondback and everything will be fine. Technically, players only need to Diamondback if they don't get targeted by the stack marker or towers, but it's easier and more consistent to just have everyone do it. After Mega Flare will be Earthshakers, but slightly spicier. Earthshaker targets now get Tempest Wing tethers, which means after the 3rd hit, Earthshaker targets will need to stay away from the party to keep everyone safe. Additionally, no one should take the tethers, or they will send everyone flying. On top of this, Earthshaker puddles will now last longer, which means that puddles will remain until the next set of Earthshakers happen. Players will need to be careful on future Earthshakers to make sure that they don't step into puddles left behind by the previous one. After every second set of Earthshakers, Bahamut will use Giga Flare. Mitigate this the same as before, and then the attack cycle continues. Bahamut has a ton of health, so his sting percentage is around 10%. Fish for physical Libra, put up off guard, and then use your finishing combos. Bahamut is, in my opinion, one of the most frustrating fights, and it can go from a white fest to a clear really quickly, so try not to get discouraged. Even if you have a lot of deaths, as we did here, you can still recover. So, good luck stinging! If you liked this video, feel free to check out these other ones. While you're at it, sting that subscribe button, share your bad breath in the comments, and stay tuned for more Blue Mage content.